I pulled into my street only to see Karen's massive SUV blocking my garage door. It felt less like an accident and more like a deliberate power move. At first, I froze, staring at the metallic wall of arrogance that had taken the shape of a shiny black SUV with chrome rims. The vehicle practically gleamed in the morning sun, positioned perfectly to trap me in, not angled, not accidental, dead center, nose to the curb, bumper pressed just close enough to my garage that it dared me to even try and maneuver my car around it. This wasn't just bad parking, this was an ambush. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. My morning had already been hectic: deadlines at work, a presentation to finalize, and an important lunch meeting I couldn't miss. And now, this blockade. You see, living in this HOA-run neighborhood had always come with its share of inconveniences. There were the constant notices about yard aesthetics, the passive-aggressive emails about community standards, and of course, the infamous HOA meetings where every small disagreement turned into a courtroom drama. But this was personal, and there was only one person in the entire neighborhood who would dare pull such a stunt: Karen. Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of all HOA rules except when they applied to her. Karen, whose lawn was always mysteriously exempt from inspection, even though her grass grew in patchy clumps, and her flower beds looked like they were at war with weeds. Karen, who wielded her SUV like a status symbol, always revving it a little too loud when she drove past my house, as if to remind me that she believed herself untouchable, and now, here it was, her SUV, sitting smugly in front of my garage like a barricade. My first instinct was to knock on her door and demand she move it. But then I remembered last month's confrontation. I had simply asked her to keep her dog from digging holes in my yard. Instead of apologizing, she had accused me of creating hostile energy in the neighborhood. The HOA, of course, sided with her. I was left with a ruined flower bed and a warning letter about maintaining positive community relations. So no, barging up to her door wasn't going to work. Not today, not ever. I stepped out of my car and studied the SUV. It was spotless, not a speck of dust, polished to perfection. The license plate had one of those custom frames that read, HOA proud, community strong. My stomach turned. I tried to think logically. Maybe she parked here temporarily. Maybe she had groceries to unload. Maybe, but as I turned my head, I saw her kitchen blinds twitch. A silhouette moved away quickly, as if retreating from the window. She knew. She wanted me to see this. That's when the anger started bubbling up. My hands shook as I dialed the HOA hotline, just hoping for once they'd be on my side. But the voice on the other end sounded less concerned and more dismissive. "We'll look into it at the next meeting," they said flatly. "For now, maybe park on the street." The street, with Karen's friends from the board watching like hawks, ready to slap a violation notice on anyone who dared leave a vehicle too long. I wasn't about to hand her another victory. The clock was ticking. I was trapped, late, and furious. I stared at that SUV again, and something in me shifted. I realized that if I didn't stand up now, this wouldn't be the last time Karen tried to control me. This wasn't just about a blocked garage. This was about reclaiming my dignity in a neighborhood that had let her run wild for too long. That was the moment the idea first sparked in my mind. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this. Karen's SUV wasn't going to stay there. Not in front of my garage, not in front of me, and when I was done, she'd think twice before crossing me again. But little did I know, removing that SUV would set off a chain of events that dragged the entire HOA and even the mayor into the storm that was about to come. If you're hooked on seeing how this HOA drama unfolds, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next twist. Trust me, you'll want to see how it all ends. I thought filing a complaint with the HOA would be my chance to finally breathe again. After all, wasn't that what they were supposed to do and force fairness, keep the peace, and stop exactly this kind of nonsense. I walked into the HOA meeting with a folder in my hand, proof of Karen's harassment, and just enough optimism left to believe the system would work in my favor. The board sat in a neat row at the front, papers stacked high, pens clicking, and eyes already half-glazed. They weren't expecting drama, but they were about to get it. I explained everything clearly, how Karen had blocked my garage with her SUV, how it wasn't just inconvenient but deliberate, how she had laughed in my face when I asked her to move. I laid out pictures, timestamps, and a copy of my towing request. My voice shook slightly, not from fear, but from pent-up frustration that I'd been holding in for weeks. But before I could even finish, Karen waltzed into the room. She didn't come alone either. She brought a tray of cookies, the kind she always baked for these meetings, as if sugar could sweeten her reputation. The board members lit up like children at Christmas, thanking her as she set the tray on the table. Then she turned to me, that signature smirk already plastered across her face. "Oh dear," she said, feigning innocence. "Is this about the little parking Mick? Sup? He makes it sound so dramatic." The room shifted. I could feel it in the air, eyes softening toward her, narrowing toward me. I tried to speak again, but she jumped ahead, weaving her story like a practiced actress. She claimed she had parked in front of my garage because she was helping another neighbor unload groceries. She insisted it was only temporary and that I had overreacted. Then she twisted the knife. He stormed over to my house, she said, hand on her chest, raising his voice, scaring me. I didn't feel safe. The board gasped. Murmurs rippled through the room. Safe? I had barely raised my voice. I felt my blood pressure spike. But if I interrupted her, I'd only prove her point. So I stayed silent and watched the performance unfold. She painted herself as the victim, me as the bully, and by the time she was done, the board was eating it up along with her cookies. I tried to defend myself. I explained how she had smirked, how she told me outright she wasn't going to move her car, how this was intentional harassment. But the more I spoke, the more they leaned back, unimpressed, and then one of them chuckled, actually chuckled. "Maybe you just need to let it go," he said. "This sounds more like a neighborly misunderstanding than harassment." The room joined in with polite laughter. Some shook their heads at me as though I was wasting their time. My proof ignored, my frustration dismissed. Karen, meanwhile, basked in the glow of victory, nodding sweetly as though butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. That moment stung deeper than I can explain. It wasn't just about the blocked garage anymore. It was about dignity, about fairness. I walked into that meeting thinking the HOA was my shield. Instead, it became Karen's weapon. When the meeting ended, Karen brushed past me with a whisper only I could hear. "Told you, they'll always choose me." I froze. She was right, at least for now. She had the board wrapped around her finger, and I was left standing in the rubble of my reputation. But as I left that room, a thought gnawed at me. If she had done this so easily, twisting truth into lies, how many others had she burned before me? The laughter from the board echoed in my head, not as defeat, but as fuel. Because in that humiliation, a new determination was born. Karen thought she had won. She thought she had silenced me. What she didn't know was that I had just decided to fight back. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with something far stronger. Proof, strategy, and patience. I didn't know it yet, but the very next morning, Karen would make a move so bold, so reckless, that it would turn this petty feud into all-out war. After that disastrous HOA meeting, I couldn't shake the humiliation. Everywhere I walked in the neighborhood, I felt the weight of invisible eyes. People weren't glaring exactly, but their glances carried judgment, as if the story Karen spun about me had already traveled beyond the boardroom. And that was when I realized something important. Karen's influence wasn't limited to meetings. It spread like vines through every corner of Maplewood Estates. She was more than just a neighbor who liked control. She was using the HOA as her personal stage, bending rules for her benefit while trapping the rest of us in her web. At first, I didn't want to get involved any further. I told myself to let it go, to focus on my own life. But then, one small incident lit the fire again. It was a Tuesday morning when I saw old Mr. Henderson from down the street standing on his lawn, shaking his head at a bright orange violation notice taped to his mailbox. Henderson was the kind of neighbor who kept to himself, never caused trouble, and took pride in mowing his lawn twice a week. But the notice said his hedges were improperly trimmed, and he had been fined $150. I couldn't believe it. His hedges looked perfectly fine, better than most, in fact. Later that day, I saw Karen walk right past his yard with a smug look, as if she was patting herself on the back for catching him. That was my breaking point. I started paying attention. I began asking quiet questions, listening to stories from neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with the HOA. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Fines for minor violations here, threats of legal action. They're always aimed at neighbors Karen didn't like, or people who had disagreed with her at some point. But here's the kicker. When I walked past her house, I couldn't help but notice things she herself was guilty of. Her trash bins stayed out past collection day. Her decorative lights didn't match the approved HOA color scheme. Even her SUV, yes, the one she loved parking in front of my garage, had tinted windows darker than the neighborhood rules allowed. Yet somehow, no violation notices ever graced her property, no fines, no letters, nothing. The hypocrisy burned me alive. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I started reviewing the HOA official documents, bylaws, budgets, even newsletters tucked away in old email chains. What I discovered shocked me. Karen had been quietly rewriting the narrative of the HOA. Small changes in language that most people overlooked gave her more control. For example, she had pushed for a clause that allowed the HOA president to waive fines at their discretion. Guess who benefited from that loophole? And worse, she had secured a small administrative fund meant for community events that conveniently had no clear accounting. The more I pieced it together, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't just running the HOA, she was running a personal empire. The neighbors who adored her, they weren't just friendly faces. They were people she had strategically spared from violations. Those who opposed her, they were buried under paperwork, threats, and fines. The picture was bigger than just me and a blocked garage. I had stumbled into a system designed to keep Karen untouchable. But here's the thing about digging too deep. You eventually hit something you weren't supposed to find. Late one night, while scrolling through public records online, I found an old agenda document that included a note about special approvals Karen had granted herself. It detailed certain landscaping exceptions and an unauthorized extension to her back patio. That was the smoking gun. She wasn't just bending rules, she was breaking them outright and covering her tracks with charm and cookies. As I sat there, staring at the document on my laptop, my pulse raced. I finally had real evidence strong enough to turn the tide, but I also knew this wasn't going to be as simple as walking into the next HOA meeting and slapping the papers on the table. If Karen could twist the truth once, she could do it again. I had to be smarter. I had to play her game, but better. The very next morning, I received a letter in my mailbox, an HOA violation notice, but it wasn't for anything real. It was a fabricated charge, signed personally by Karen. And that's when I realized she knew I was digging. Instead of confronting her with anger, I crafted a bold plan that would expose her abuse of power in a way no one could ignore. When that fabricated violation notice landed in my mailbox, my first instinct was pure frustration. It accused me of excessive clutter in the driveway. Even though my driveway was spotless, no bikes, no tools, not even a leaf blower out of place. The accusation was laughable, but I knew what it really meant. Karen was onto me. She sensed I was looking into her shady HOA dealings, and this was her way of firing a warning shot. At first, I almost crumpled the paper and stormed to her house. That would have been the easy reaction. Pound on her door, shout, demand she stop. But then I remembered the board meeting, the laughter, the way she spun her lies so smoothly. If I lost my cool, she'd use it against me again. No, this time I couldn't fight fire with fire. I had to be patient. I had to be strategic. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, notes scattered everywhere. I reread the HOA bylaws, highlighting the vague language Karen had twisted to her advantage. I cross-referenced the exceptions. She had granted herself against the very violations she fined others for. The more I studied, the more obvious her double standard became. But I knew simply presenting documents at a meeting wouldn't work. She'd just smile, twist words, and the board would side with her. No, I needed something dramatic, something undeniable, something that would expose her arrogance in a way no one could dismiss or laugh off. That's when the idea came to me, not in a flash of genius, but as a slow realization. If Karen wanted to block me, maybe I needed to block her. If she wanted to use her SUV as a symbol of power, maybe her SUV was the key to unraveling everything. I thought back to the day she parked in front of my garage, smirking as I asked her to move. That wasn't just inconvenience. It was a message. I can put my car wherever I want, and you can't stop me. What if I turned that arrogance back on her? Of course, I wasn't reckless enough to damage her property. That would have only backfired. But what if her SUV ended up somewhere unexpected, somewhere so public that the story would travel through the entire neighborhood, and maybe even beyond? I started making quiet calls. A buddy of mine from college ran a small logistics company. He owed me a favor, and he had access to equipment that could handle heavy lifting. When I explained what I needed, keeping it lighthearted, almost like a prank, he chuckled but didn't say no. "If you're serious," he said, "I can make it happen." And I was serious, dead serious. For days, I let Karen believe she had won. I paid no attention to the violation notice. I even gave her a polite nod when she strutted past me at the mailbox. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was quietly arranging every detail of my plan: timing, equipment, location. But the key to success wasn't just moving her SUV, it was making sure people knew why it had happened. I began collecting testimonies from neighbors, the ones who had been unfairly fined or targeted. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation, but once they realized they weren't alone, the stories poured out. Overgrown hedges, trash bins, minor paint colors. Karen had fined them all while excusing herself for bigger violations. Piece by piece, I built a case, a quiet, meticulous record of her hypocrisy. And I knew that when the time came, her SUV wasn't just going to be in the wrong place. It was going to be the perfect symbol of her arrogance finally catching up to her. Every step I took was calculated. I kept my cool, kept my head down, and let her bask in the illusion that I'd been silenced. Little did she know, her arrogance was digging her own trap deeper and deeper. By the time the plan was fully in motion, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of nerves and excitement. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about balance, about showing the board, the neighbors, and maybe even Karen herself, that no one, not even the self-proclaimed Queen of Maplewood Estates, was above fairness. The night before the plan was set to unfold, I peeked out my window and froze. Karen had parked her SUV in front of my garage again, almost daring me to react. Only this time, she had no idea what was about to happen next. On a quiet morning, a massive crane rolled onto our street. The low rumble of its engine echoed against the row of suburban houses, waking people who weren't even early risers. Curtains shifted, windows cracked open. And by the time the crane positioned itself in front of my driveway, a half-circle of curious neighbors had already gathered on the sidewalks, whispering and pointing like they'd stumbled into a movie set. I stood in my driveway, arms crossed, watching the crew work with calm precision. My heart pounded, though I forced my expression to remain neutral. This wasn't just about moving a vehicle. It was about sending a message. For weeks, Karen had blocked my garage, acted above the rules, and wielded HOA power like a weapon. Today, the tables were turning. The workers in bright vests unfurled thick straps, threading them beneath the frame of Karen's glossy black SUV. The sight was surreal. This wasn't some casual tow truck job. This was industrial muscle, the kind of equipment that normally moved steel beams or shipping containers, and now it was about to hoist Karen's prized possession into the sky. I caught sight of Mr. Thompson, the retired Navy man who lived 3 doors down, standing in his bathrobe on his lawn. He gave me a slow nod, the kind of nod that said, "I don't know what you're up to, son, but I'm enjoying it." Meanwhile, whispers rippled through the crowd. Is he really gonna lift that thing? No way. He can't. Watch him. He looks serious. The crane's boom extended, groaning as it climbed higher into the sky. A gust of morning wind tugged at the straps dangling from its hook. My pulse quickened. This was it. Just then, Karen's front door burst open. She stormed out in a floral bathrobe, hair tied in messy curlers, slippers slapping the pavement as she marched toward me. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched, voice shrill enough to silence some of the murmurs. I turned to her slowly, keeping my voice calm. "I'm clearing my driveway. You parked in front of my garage." Again. Her face flushed red, and she jabbed a finger toward the crane. "That is my car. You can't just dangle it like some kind of circus act. I'll have your head for this." The crane operator, unfazed, gave me a thumbs up as if asking for the final go-ahead. My lips curled into the faintest smile. I raised my hand, hesitated for dramatic effect, then lowered it in a firm signal. With a hydraulic hiss, the straps tightened. The SUV groaned, its tires lifting off the asphalt. A collective gasp swept through the neighborhood. Karen clutched her chest, wobbling like she might faint. The sight was glorious. Her shiny SUV, the symbol of her arrogance, now dangled mid-air like a captured beast. Sunlight reflected off its polished hood as it slowly swung above the driveway. "You're insane," Karen shrieked, stumbling toward the crane crew. "Put it down this instant. This is theft." One of the workers held up a hand. "Ma'am, step back. Safety zone." Karen stomped her foot like a toddler denied candy. But she couldn't do anything, not with half the neighborhood recording the scene on their phones, and that was the beauty of it. This wasn't just my revenge. This was public exposure. Every time Karen had fined a neighbor unfairly, every time she had lectured someone about their lawn height or mailbox paint, every time she had bent the rules for her own benefit, it was all catching up with her in this single, unforgettable image. Her SUV dangling in midair while everyone watched. The crane pivoted, inch by inch, turning toward the street. Its shadow slid across Karen's lawn like a creeping storm. "Where are you taking it?" Karen wailed, her voice cracking. I leaned closer, lowering my voice just enough for the crowd to hush and catch every word. "Let's just say, somewhere more fitting." Gasps and murmurs erupted. Some neighbors chuckled under their breath. Even the stern Mrs. Patel from across the street, who normally sided with Karen out of fear, covered her smile with her hand. Karen spun in frantic circles, trying to gauge where the crane was heading. She finally noticed the crew loading orange cones at the end of the block, clearing the path toward downtown. Her jaw dropped. "You wouldn't," she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The SUV swinging over the street spoke louder than any words I could have chosen. The engine of the crane roared louder, gears grinding as it prepared to roll forward. The ground vibrated beneath our feet. The crowd pressed closer, some holding up phones, others just shaking their heads in awe. Karen lunged toward me, grabbing my arm. "You'll regret this. I'll call the mayor himself." I turned my head slightly, letting her words hang in the air. Then I gave a calm reply, laced with just enough mystery to tighten the suspense around her. "Funny you should mention the mayor." Her hand slipped from my arm, Her eyes narrowed, suspicion battling fear. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And at that exact moment, the crane lurched forward, carrying her SUV toward the main road. The neighborhood watched, spellbound, as Karen's car disappeared around the corner, dangling high above the asphalt like a trophy being carried away. Karen's face drained of color. She looked at me, trembling with rage and confusion. "Where are you taking it?" she cried again, voice breaking. I stepped closer, leaned down, and whispered so only she could hear. "Straight to the mayor's lawn." Her scream echoed down the street as the crane disappeared from view, leaving the crowd buzzing with excitement and me standing tall in the center of it all. But deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. Because once Karen realized what I had done, the real storm was going to hit. Karen races to her phone, vowing revenge, as the sound of the crane fades into the distance. When her car was lowered gently onto the mayor's pristine lawn, the entire city's eyes turned on her, and her HOA influence crumbled in an instant. I'll never forget the sound the crane made as it extended its boom over the mayor's property. The metallic groan echoed through downtown, drawing pedestrians and commuters to a halt. People craned their necks, shielding their eyes from the morning sun, as Karen's glossy black SUV descended like some alien craft, landing in the middle of our quiet city. The mayor's lawn was immaculate, perfect emerald grass trimmed to uniform height, flower beds bursting with carefully arranged tulips, and a marble walkway that led to the grand white columns of City Hall itself. And now, in the middle of all that order and beauty, her SUV touched down with a soft thud, completely out of place. The crowd that had gathered downtown gasped as the straps released and the crane operator stepped back. Phones were held high, recording every second. Social media feeds lit up instantly. By the time the crane began retracting, there were already whispers of, "This is going viral." The mayor himself, a tall man in his late 50s with silver hair and a presence that commanded attention, emerged from the building. His eyes narrowed as he took in the bizarre scene. He adjusted his tie, clearly trying to decide if this was some elaborate prank, a protest, or a mistake. I stood there on the sidewalk, hands clasped behind my back, pretending to be just another curious onlooker. Inside, though, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was bold, borderline reckless, but it was necessary. Karen's arrogance had infected the whole neighborhood for too long, and nothing short of a public spectacle would shatter her illusion of power. Karen, of course, was not far behind. She had trailed the crane in her sedan, screeching the entire way down. When she arrived and spotted her SUV sitting crooked on the mayor's grass, she let out a sound that was somewhere between a shriek and a sob. "This is an outrage," she shouted, barreling past startled onlookers. "That's my car. Move it immediately." The mayor raised an eyebrow, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, why exactly is your vehicle on my property?" Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She looked around desperately for someone to blame, and her eyes eventually landed on me. She pointed so hard her finger trembled. He did this. He had it lifted with some ridiculous crane stunt. The mayor's eyes shifted to me. The weight of his stare was enough to silence even the murmuring crowd. My throat went dry, but I forced myself to step forward, chin up, steady voice. "With all due respect, Mr. Mayor, I didn't put her car here. She did, by blocking my garage repeatedly, by abusing her position on the HOA, and by thinking she was untouchable. I simply rearranged the scenery." The crowd broke into hushed laughter. The mayor didn't laugh, but the corners of his mouth twitched as if he was suppressing a smile. Karen flailed her arms dramatically. "You can't just defame me like this. I'm on the HOA board, I represent our community," and that's when the crowd turned. Someone shouted, "Yeah, by fining us for no reason." Another voice added, "She told me my shutters weren't the right shade of beige." And another, "She made me sod my lawn twice this year. while hers was full of weeds. One by one, voices rose from the crowd, neighbors and even strangers speaking out against her. It was as if the SUV on the mayor's lawn had cracked open a dam, unleashing years of pent-up frustration. Karen's face drained of color. She spun in circles, desperate to silence them, but the wave of accusations only grew louder. The mayor raised a hand, quieting everyone with a single gesture. His voice was low, deliberate. "Ma'am, your neighbors seem to have quite a bit to say about your leadership. Perhaps it's time we looked into your position on the HOA more closely." Karen's jaw dropped, her hands shook. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, no longer the towering tyrant who knocked on doors with violation slips, but a desperate woman watching her empire crumble in real time. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, the mayor turned to his staff. "Make a note of this incident. We'll be reviewing the HOA activities and this woman's role in it immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen clutched her head, muttering under her breath, "This isn't happening, this isn't happening." But it was. And for the first time in a long time, justice was visible, tangible, and undeniable. Still, I knew Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Her pride was too deep, her bitterness too sharp. This public humiliation wasn't the end for her. It was just the spark of a dangerous retaliation. As the crowd dispersed, with people still snapping photos of her SUV sitting on the mayor's perfect grass, I caught Karen's eyes. They were wild, bloodshot, and full of a promise. She mouthed two chilling words at me, words only I could see: "You'll pay." As the mayor's staff prepares to investigate, Karen slips away into the crowd, already plotting her next move. The spectacle forced the HOA to reform. Neighbors finally spoke up, and Karen's reign of control ended. I got back my garage and my peace, but the change didn't happen overnight. The morning after Karen's SUV sat like an uninvited guest on the mayor's pristine lawn, the neighborhood felt different. People walked their dogs with lighter steps. A few waved to me for the first time, not with pity or hesitation, but with respect. It was as though the act of standing up to Karen had given everyone else permission to stand too. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't let go quietly. Her pride was like a thorn. Once pricked, it festered, and sure enough, the very next week, she showed up at the HOA meeting, flanked by her usual allies, chin raised as if nothing had happened. The meeting room was packed, more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, neighbors lined the walls, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Normally, these meetings were dull affairs, talk of landscaping budgets and parking policies. But this night felt like a trial. Karen began with her usual theatrics, flipping her hair and adjusting her pearls before speaking. "What happened downtown was a gross violation of my rights," she announced, her voice trembling with false indignation. "And I will not stand for slander from my own neighbors." But this time, the room didn't shrink beneath her tone. Instead, voices rose in protest. "You fined me 3 times for flower pots," one man shouted. "You threatened to tow my daughter's car for parking in our own driveway," a woman cried. "And you blocked my garage." I added, my voice steady, firm. The board, who once cowered under Karen's sway, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They could see the tide had turned. Then came the mayor's letter. One of his aides, a sharply dressed woman in a navy suit, entered the room mid-meeting. She handed an envelope to the HOA president, who opened it with trembling fingers. The president cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began to read aloud. "The mayor's office has received numerous complaints regarding the mismanagement of this HOA. Effective immediately, an independent audit will be conducted. All current leadership roles, including board members, are subject to review." The room erupted in gasps. Karen's face turned chalk white. She jumped to her feet, slamming her palms on the table. "This is a witch hunt. You can't do this to me. I am this HOA," but her declaration was met not with fear, but with laughter. Nervous at first, then louder, bolder. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around her now looked her square in the eyes and smiled as if saying, "Your reign is over." The audit that followed was swift and thorough. The mayor's office uncovered years of petty fines, uneven enforcement of rules, and even instances where Karen excused her own violations while punishing others for the same infractions. She had turned what should have been a community organization into her personal kingdom, and now that kingdom crumbled brick by brick. When the final report was delivered, the recommendation was clear. Karen was banned from holding any HOA position ever again. I wish I could describe her face that day. It wasn't anger. It was emptiness, like someone who realized the crown she wore was made of paper all along. She left the room quietly, clutching her designer bag, and for the first time in years, she didn't have the last word. The HOA restructured in the months that followed. Elections were held, new board members were chosen, and this time, real fairness guided decisions. Instead of fines for petty things like mailbox paint, we focused on real improvement, repairing sidewalks, adding streetlights, creating a small park where kids could play. The community felt alive again, like neighbors instead of prisoners under surveillance. As for me, my garage was finally mine again. No SUV parked across it, no nasty notes slipped under my door, just peace. One evening, I stood in my driveway, watching the sun set behind the rooftops. The air was still, golden light washing over the cul-de-sac. For the first time since moving in, I felt at home, but the real victory wasn't just about my garage. It was about what we all gained, the courage to speak up, the reminder that no one person should hold power through fear, and the proof that sometimes the boldest stand inspires change far beyond what you planned. I glanced down the street where Karen's house sat, blinds drawn, porch light off. She kept to herself now, no longer patrolling the neighborhood with her clipboard of rules. Her reign was truly over. And as I closed my garage door that night, the click of it locking into place sounded sweeter than ever. Because it wasn't just the sound of a garage, it was the sound of freedom. Just as peace settles in, a new letter arrives in my mailbox, stamped from the HOA office. My heart skips. Has Karen found a way back, or is this the dawn of an entirely new chapter?